Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. Joining me via Skype this evening to discuss the day's news stories are sitting on the left of your screen, Chris McCusker, regular contributor to the programme. Welcome back, Chris. And sitting on your right as you look at the screen is Effie Samara. Welcome back to the programme, Effie, another well-known contributor.
Hi, Gordon.
Okay, so I'm going to dive straight into the coronavirus update. And I can tell you that as of 2 o'clock today, a total of 267,371 people have now been tested through NHS Scotland labs and the UK government regional testing centres. And of these, 249,107 were confirmed negative. 18,264 were positive. There are 5 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. Now, sadly, there is one reported death of people who have tested positive today. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases. Not everyone with the virus will display the symptoms, and not all of those with the symptoms will be tested. Of the people who have tested positive, 432 were in hospital last night, 4 of whom were in intensive care. Plus 5 more people in intensive care with suspected COVID-19. The number of patients who have now died in Scotland from complications caused by coronavirus COVID-19 infections now stands at 2,487. This number only includes those who died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest daily UK figures are not available at the moment when we went to press, so we unfortunately don't have anything to bring you from the rest of the UK just now. But moving to our main story, our first story this evening, and that is the Phase 2 final measures have been confirmed by the First Minister today. Provisions to allow children to play outdoors with friends, and the introduction of exemptions to the 2-metre physical distancing rule and mandatory use of face coverings in retail settings from Phase 3 are amongst the measures announced by the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, today, Thursday, the 2nd of July. From tomorrow, children aged 11 and under will be able to play outdoors without physical distancing in groups of up to 8 and no more than 2 other households. Children aged 12 to 17 are asked to continue to physically distance but can meet in groups of up to 8 outdoors and with no more than 2 other households at a time. There will be no limit placed on the number of households children can meet in one day, enabling siblings to meet separate groups of friends or to meet groups in addition to those their parents or carers might take part in. The 5-mile limit for leisure travel will be lifted for the majority of the country from tomorrow, Friday the 3rd of July, as will restrictions on self-catering and self-contained accommodation. The First Minister also confirmed that outdoor hospitality will be able to start trading from Monday, the 6th of July, in line with indicative dates previously set out. Following the successful introduction of mandatory face coverings on public transport, the measure will be extended to include the retail settings from Friday the 10th of July, in line with the expected changes to other lockdown measures on that date. The First Minister also announced the outcome of a review of the evidence of the 2-metre social distancing rule. Advice from the COVID-19 advisory group makes clear that the fundamental science around distance and transmission remains unchanged and that the risk increases with proximity to an infected individual. And as such, the Scottish Government will retain the 2 metres default physical distancing requirement for Phase 3, but introduce exceptions to this requirement if practicable. Mitigating measures can be implemented. Settings and sectors considered appropriate for exceptions pending agreed mitigations are public transport, outdoor hospitality, indoor hospitality and retail. There will be no exceptions prior to the move to Phase 3. So it's a lot to take in a short period of time. But let's take maybe the first of these new measures to be introduced, allowing children to play outdoors without social distancing. I think, Effie, if I come to you first of all on this one, surely this must be great for kids because they have had so much difficulty and been restricted so much by their parents. This must be a joy for them.
Well, yeah, well, certainly, here we've already had a little play in the garden with two friends, and that was last week. And obviously, we had to be very careful. It's quite difficult. I mean, my one is just 12 now, and her little friends are 11 still. So you've got it's clear, and I'm sure anyone who's ever been around small children will say that children love proximity. They love getting close to the friends, and that's how they express themselves.
Yeah.
So that will be a great relief to them all and to the parents. I was just wondering, I mean, perhaps maybe Chris or yourself could fill me in on that. Did the advice change? Was that on the basis of something that was discussed within the committee? Obviously, there is evidence. There seems to be clear evidence that children under 11 do not pose a threat. We know to themselves they are not. We haven't seen huge data on them, thankfully. There's hardly been any really, really bad news within that group. But in terms of contagiousness and the ability to transmit, and they are vectors. But obviously, this particular lifting of the social distancing of the 2 meters, it must come from something which I'm not up to speed at the moment, but I don't know whether it was something that was produced as a result of a meeting today or evidence.
Effie, just something I need to reiterate, that it is only children under 11 who will be able to play without social distancing, but the 2 meter rule has not been lifted. We have to make that very clear to people. There are exceptions to it for some special groups and individuals. Chris, if I can come to you and take, I mean, we're also talking about teenagers here, Chris. And teenagers, I know, I've seen them out on the streets. I'm sure you have yourself in groups. I'm sure there were more than 8 of them. Didn't look like they were socially distancing. But they're now being given carte blanche to go, not carte blanche, but if you like, permission to go out and meet in groups of up to 8. Do you think they're going to actually socially distance? I know some young people are very, very careful about such things, but not all.
Some are and some are not, Gordon. And I have seen, like yourself, children gathering in groups of 8, 10, 12. But they have been, sort of like moving around. You can't impose these kind of sanctions on children because children, inherently do what they like up to a certain point. Before you pull in the leash and stuff like that. Thankfully, I don't go through that with any of my children now. They're all growing up and socially responsible. But anecdotally, yes, as you're driving around, you can see that kids are not adhering to the social distance. Then you can maybe see 1 or 2 of them are out and maybe they're running or they're cycling or I think it's I think what we have here is the fact that the First Minister has basically not given them carte blanche, but is basically asking them to use good sense. Generally, if you leave children alone, 9 times out of 10 they do exercise good sense.
Chris, if while I've got you here talking, can we just move to the next part of this and the talk about lifting some of the restrictions on industry, particularly the outdoor hospitality industry? That must surely be very important at this time now.
It is, yes. And I would urge the viewers to go to the S2UC website and look at their bullet plan, which largely the Scottish Government have adopted. Again, I'll reiterate the fact that the Scottish Government do actually engage with the trade unions in Scotland.
So, Chris, the STUC, what have they said, Chris, in this? What have the STUC been saying?
Sorry, what was that?
I was just asking you, Chris, what is specifically in the STUC website that is pertinent
the STUC website, they put up a 5-point bullet plan for shops and retail manufacturing to open up responsibly.
Okay.
And that includes like some one-way systems,
Yeah.
hand sanitizing stations.
So does this, Chris? Does this cover bars and beer gardens as well as cafes,
it
restaurants?
will cover bars and it will cover beer gardens because at the end of the day, although the catering trade is not widely represented by unions, unfortunately, but there will be a social contract between the pub chains and the Scottish Government in order to adhere to the government guidelines so that they can open up outside initially to start with.
So would I be right, Chris, in saying that the businesses concerned have to come up with a safe system of working so that the public and employees are protected? Is that the way this works?
That is exactly correct, yes. And all pubs and sort of like eateries that can open up outside, they all have a step plan that they can go through, and they all have a cleaning regime that they will go through, and it's based on that. If they can show that they are being socially responsible, then it might, open up a wee bit more and stuff like that. I'm a wee bit thinking the First Minister didn't mention about the bars that are able to open up in the beer gardens. She
did,
never
Chris.
said
I think she
anything
did.
about the toilet facilities within those bars. Which it throws a wee bit of a grey area over there for me.
I think mitigation is what they're looking at, Chris. The government is saying that if the business comes up with a plan which mitigates the risk or lowers it to the lowest possible level, then they may make exceptions in those cases. Effie, can I come to you for a moment?
The type where you've got the tables, and they're possibly looking at family clusters in those at those tables, and those tables being 2 meters apart.
Yeah, I understand, Chris.
But the 1 meter is shortened so that the waiter can place the food on the table.
It has to be realistic, doesn't it?
Yeah. So it's all about being socially responsible. That's what it is.
Okay. Listen, thanks for that, Chris. Effie, if I could come to you in the next part of this lockdown release, if you want to call it that, and that was the First Minister confirmed that not only outdoor hospitality, but there will be lifting some of the restrictions on self-catering and self-contained accommodation. Now, do you think that is going to be enough maybe to try and start back up the holiday industry in Scotland?
Of course, and that's what it's intending to do. And I think what I sort of caught literally within the last half hour was also the pretty amazing news of Jackson Carlaw, I believe, endorsing that as well, which is a novelty on his part. It's obviously it is something that they've been awaiting on. We also had the really sort of bad news of people losing their jobs, lots and lots of people within the hospitality industry and other industries. A big announcement today, a UK-wide announcement of a lot of people losing their jobs, and also the furlough scheme, which we're going to be discussing
I believe a
later.
restaurant chain announced.
But in terms of the hospitality industry, this has been a big concern. So it will be very, very welcome news, I think, Gordon.
Yeah. Now, coming to the introduction of mandatory face coverings on public transport, now being introduced into retail as well. Now, there have been a number, Chris, of bizarre comments online saying that it's an invasion or overriding people's human rights by forcing them to wear a mask. Surely this is in their own self-interest to wear the mask.
I didn't actually think that we had an influx of American
be surprised.
It's all Trump.
Donald Trump
isn't
voters who want to burn masks, possibly their bras and their underwear as well, because they all want to be free and liberal. Look, I personally think that we should have been wearing masks. I have been wearing a mask when I go into a food store since the first start of stage one of the route map out of lockdown.
Yeah.
So as again, I go back to that what I was saying was about people being socially responsible, and if you are in a small corner shop, then obviously the chances are greater because
Indeed.
you're in a confined space. If you're in a 35 square foot retail unit at Sainsbury's or Tesco or whatever, then obviously it depends on how many people are
Of course,
in there.
yeah, all business
But by the
premises
same
different.
token, you should be socially responsible for your own health and for other people's health to wear a mask.
It's a
We're not
no-brainer,
talking
really,
about random street fines and stuff like that by the police, if you're not wearing a mask and stuff like that. But it may be that, some businesses could say, you're not wearing a mask, you're not coming in.
Okay.
Simple as that.
Thank you, Chris. Well, speaking of people, taking their lives in their hands and not wearing masks, there appears to have been a cluster of coronavirus cases in the Annan and Gretna areas of Dumfries and Galloway. Restrictions to distance people can travel for leisure purposes are to remain in place in these areas. People in Scotland living in the postcode areas DG16, that's Gretna, DG12, that's Annan, DG1 and 2, Dumfries, and DG11, Lockerbie, DG13, Langholm, DG14, Canonbie, are being asked to travel no more than 5 miles while efforts to manage the outbreak continued. This advice does not apply to essential travel. Holidaymakers from other areas who have booked self-catering accommodation in these postcodes are still able to take up their reservations, but they must adhere to these travel restrictions once they arrive. Visits to care homes in these postcode areas will not be permitted over the weekend because of the risk to staff and residents. The advice will stay in place this weekend. The advice will stay in place this weekend with a further update on local restrictions provided on Monday. Effie, this story has been circulating on social media, I know, for the last 24 hours, people getting a bit hot under the collar. And attempting to blame people coming across the border. But apparently this is not the case, is it? The outbreak came from a healthcare worker, I believe, who worked in the hospital in Carlisle.
In the hospital in Carlisle. And, and this demonstrates, for me, what this demonstrates is that the moment something like this is discovered, it's essential, it's urgently essential at the moment to be able to impose the restrictions, the localized regional restrictions in order to contain that outbreak. So going back to a slightly wider point about people complaining whether people should be traveling from England into Scotland, or if you like a bit wider internationally into Scotland and things like that, and trying to make a constitutional point or politicize the argument.
Yeah.
We can now see how ridiculous that is, even within the same region, even within the same place, nation, you can have an outbreak. So the ability to isolate that area is absolutely urgent at the moment. And I totally support, if the data demonstrates and evidences this, there must be restrictions as to how far we can travel, because it spreads like wildfire, and it's very, very easy for something to be brought in. So there you have it. It's just happened. We know about it. They're trying to contain it. That's the essential thing.
Okay, listen. Thank you for the irony, of course, was that there was a great deal of talk about opening up Dumfries and Galloway. But I would say here that I think the Scottish Government has made it very clear that people are still allowed to come on holiday to this area, but they just must adhere to the travel restrictions once they arrive at their self-catering accommodation. Chris, do you think this is a proportionate response from the Scottish Government?
I definitely do, and I agree with Ethy. The fact that I think that the First Minister has been great in managing not to politicise it, and we see that as the Westminster government, the Tories basically, that are politicising it. And if I could stray just a wee bit off of the thingy here, because I mean, while we're talking about borders and stuff like that, we see Jacob Rees-Mogg coming out with some ridiculous claims of Brexit border and all the rest of it, and it's absolutely.
Boris Johnson claimed there was no border.
Well, I mean, that again was just absolutely stupid, because the First Minister said, glibly, if that's the case, then, I'll go and start fighting my manifesto in Newcastle. That's how ridiculous it is.
Of course, the border has existed. The border has existed between England and Scotland since 1337. I think it was the Treaty of York was signed, and that identified the border, and both England and Scotland agreed to that. Anyway, I would like to move on now.
Gordon, was the fact that there are inherent differences in all devolved competencies and in all provinces of Britain, right? And I'm talking about the likes of Jersey.
Yes.
Jersey has got a separate. It has never been mentioned.
No,
and it's
of course.
a separate phase on the whole coronavirus, and it's never been interfered with. And although Jersey's a bit of a principality and stuff like that, there's still several things that the UK government can intervene with, very much the same as the Isle of Man, all the rest of it, and you never hear any of this. And it is all down to the fact that the Tories want to politicise this so-called border, which the First Minister, again, at a briefing, had to point out the fact that some people in the border areas, if I could use that in inverted commas, because of the 5-mile restriction, she was asking them not to travel the 5 miles into England in order to have a pint.
Well, that makes sense,
So she was making that, she was basically pleading with people to be socially responsible.
Well, I mean, the Scottish Government has made it very, very clear, Chris, I think, that with these measures being relaxed now, they've been very specific about which measures, and have also, I think, been crystal clear that there is no question about the 2-metre rule, that is staying. And that is something which people have been talking about for the last few weeks as possibly might change. But obviously the Scottish Government is getting probably good advice on this, I guess.
Honestly, Gordon, the First Minister could not be any more crystal clear. And all we see from the English Tories, that is, ably backed up by their Scottish clown counterparts, is the fact that, hey, it's a free-for-all. We've got Super Saturday coming up, where, let's just throw caution to the wind and go out and basically get pissed. Well, that's what they want.
Yeah, well, we saw
because it is corporate greed that is driving their whole truck. They're not.
Yeah, it's a difference in moral
human life
position.
They're just giving about profit.
Okay, Chris, thank you for that just now. I'm going to draw a line under that story for the moment and move on to our next tale, which is a survey. And the SNP has warned the Treasury against prematurely shutting down financial support schemes after a new survey painted a bleak picture of the economic hit to key sectors and warnings that a tsunami of jobs would disappear overnight. The findings of the Scottish Chambers of Commerce revealed that manufacturing, tourism and retail and wholesale were some of the worst hit sectors in the business confidence due to the coronavirus, with a staggering 95% of tourism firms reporting a fall in business confidence. Tim Allen, the president of the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, stated that a sudden end to these vital financial support measures would not be welcomed by anyone, and a tsunami of jobs would disappear overnight. Earlier, it was reported that over 10,000 jobs could be lost in the coming days, in the coming days alone, as the economic hit of the crisis is felt by firms. In commenting, the SNP Shadow Chancellor, Alison Thewlish MP, has said, the findings from the Scottish Chambers of Commerce paints a bleak picture of the deep economic hit to key sectors across Scotland, once again highlighting the need for strengthened financial support measures to help businesses and industries to survive this crisis. Now, this is a recurring theme. If I could come to you first, Effie, on this subject. It is a recurring theme, isn't it, that we have heard the Scottish Government asking repeatedly for the British government in London to make sure that these financial safety nets remain in place for as long as necessary. But are they going to do that?
No, of course not. Because if they did that, they would give you more freedom, and more freedom will demonstrate that Scotland is able to handle more freedom and do quite well on it, and that would destroy their argument. So they won't do it. I believe Katie Forbes has now requested this 3 or 4 times, an increase in the fiscal powers and in other powers and freedoms to basically use her position within the cabinet to enable more help and financial support within the sectors that need it. And you have mentioned manufacturing, tourism, retail. I believe they are the hardest hit. She, on her part, I know they have supported education. I know they've supported universities. They've okayed a very large fund for research. Also, individuals, the small businesses, the small grants for businesses, and the rates relief that they've offered. However, their competencies are limited, and they are always controlled by Westminster ultimately, because the Scottish Government is not able to borrow. However, they are always liable to repay money that is borrowed on their behalf by the British government. Indeed. So this is something that we need to be able to understand. To answer to your question again, just to reiterate, they will not do so. They will say no again, and I would not be totally surprised if they would like to see some of the smaller firms go bust, just to conduct their massive sort of herd immunity, even on a corporate level. So they do have their plan. I am sure of it. They have the power to not do so, because we've seen this in Germany, we've seen this in other countries, in Denmark, we've seen this also in Spain with the introduction of a basic income. So they can assist and they can support. They are very, very powerful. My instinct says that they probably won't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that, Effie. Chris, if I could come to you now, and the Chambers of Commerce, the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, they're not particularly noted for their concern, shall we say, for humanity. They're more a business organisation, but they obviously see the risk to their employees here. Surely, otherwise they wouldn't be making this plea.
Well, no, I mean obviously not. But the one thing that the Chambers of Commerce would be looking out for is, obviously it's the retention of as many jobs as possible in order to turn the corporate hamster wheel of industry.
That's a nice phrase.
They have to look themselves hard in the mirror, and they have got to be asking their masters in Westminster, because at the end of the day, that's who they actually serve. They've got to be asking themselves some hard questions. We just take, for instance, my sector, the aviation industry.
Yeah.
The aviation industry in Scotland, it provides 8,000 jobs alone. That's 8,000 jobs. And with the loss of the jobs at Rolls-Royce, globally the loss of the jobs within Airbus, yes. You look again at the amount of airlines that are cutting their staff, pilots and cabin crew by half, and that includes our ground crew. which impacts then on the airports, which are,
But of course, everything is linked, Chris, isn't it? I mean, the whole thing is linked.
Gordon, absolutely correct. So they have to, and what is not happening, and this really, really riles my goat, is the fact that, it's like they look for answers, and they look to the Tory government to give them that answers, and the Tory government turn around and say, "Oh, look, a squirrel."
Yes, okay.
You know what I mean? They totally deflect it away, and they talk about, oh, this amount of investment and all the rest of it. We had Boris Johnson coming out saying this was the greatest investment that he was giving the country since Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Okay.
And what do we find? We find that it is Germany are putting in 200 times more into their economy than what the British government are doing.
Okay.
We also see the British government get back to what they know best, and they start opening job centres, which will be able to impose sanctions on people who are applying for jobs that aren't there.
Chris, listen, thank you. I can hear that you're very upset about this, and I understand that. However, we need to move on, unfortunately, and the next subject we're going to talk about is equally troubling, I suppose, and that is that the European Union and UK trade talks have broken up early over some serious disagreements. The latest negotiations in Brussels on an EU-UK trade and security deal have broken up early, with the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, complaining of a lack of respect and engagement by the British government. The two sides ended this week's talks, the first held in person since February, a day ahead of jointly agreed schedule, amid evident frustration at the lack of progress in bridging what Barnier and his UK counterpart David Frost described as a serious disagreements. Our goal was to get negotiations successfully and quickly on a trajectory to reach an agreement, Barnier said in a statement. However, after 4 days of discussions, serious divergences remain. The former French minister said that Brussels had listened carefully to Boris Johnson when he had told the EU's institutional leaders 2 weeks ago during a video conference that he wanted a political agreement over the summer on the terms of a deal. Barnier added that the EU recognised the British red lines of no rule for European Court of Justice in the UK, no obligation for the UK to continue to be bound by EU laws, and an agreement on fishery that shows Brexit makes a real difference. But he suggested that the EU's willingness to be flexible in its initial demands in light of the British positions had not been met with similar understanding from Downing Street over Brussels' red lines. The EU has hinted at a willingness to drop its initial asks of EU state aid being incorporated into domestic UK legislation, non-regression from the bloc's environmental, social and labour regulations, and the effective continuation of the common fisheries policy. But the EU negotiator said that Downing Street needed to reciprocate with new proposals, adding that there would be no deal without a level playing field, without level playing field conditions in any potential treaty, including state aid. Now, this is obviously a very serious point in the discussions between the United Kingdom and the European Union. If I could come to you first, Effie, this appears to show that the European Union has made a large number of quite serious concessions here, and the British government seems to have done absolutely nothing.
Well, this has been consistently the case since the Brexit referendum. They have never shown themselves to be, if you like, uncooperative. In my judgment, and I can be quite critical. The Brussels, Barnier is a seasoned diplomat. In all of them, actually, this isn't even about personalities. However, starting with David Davies and then moving through the different bizarre personalities that were appointed by Downing Street to conduct these negotiations, I can say that the British side have dealt with this with nothing less than absolute disrespect. The willingness, the plan was there from day one, Gordon, and we all know this, and
Yeah.
I've said this before, to go for no deal. Otherwise, Brexit doesn't make sense to them. When they were coming out before the referendum and promising people access to single market and things like that, they knew that access to single market meant alignment and meant alignment in social, labor, and environmental protections. And this is exactly what Brexit is about decimating these protections. So they were lying from day one. And now we've come to the end of the line and we can see that this is exactly what they're going to do. My hope is that we up here in Scotland can deviate from that while we've still got time.
Okay, and Chris. Okay, let me just move this on a little further. We're going to talk also, I mean, it's part of the same story, this, so if you bear with me for a moment. This is about the UK's Shared Prosperity Fund uncertainty, which is going to become very important very shortly. Urgent clarification has been sought from the UK government about the replacement of the the EU structural funds, or ESF programmes, which play an important role in planning for economic recovery from the coronavirus. With just 6 months to go until the UK is set to leave the European Union, the Minister for Trade, Investment and Innovation, Ivan McKee, has asked for detailed information on how the proposed replacement programme will work in Scotland and what the value of the fund will be. Now, the full text of the letter is here, and I could read all of it to you, but I'm not going to do that. But it's the Scottish Government is trying its best to fight for what is left of the European Union's available funds for Scotland. It doesn't seem to be any British movement on finding a replacement, particularly for these funds. Chris, I don't know if you have heard anything to the contrary, but it would seem that the British government is planning just to axe everything that the European Union currently provides.
Yeah, basically, and I think what we could see from the British government is the fact that they want to do things on a wing and a prayer, and basically hoof it. If we look back if we look at who is actually in government, we can see that there are really, really very, very few serious politicians with any history and any credibility. And as a joke government, and what they are doing is they are basically saying that what we would like to do is get to the 31st of December. That is their mantra.
Yeah.
And once we get to the 31st of December, we can turn round to the whole the United Kingdom and say, it's us, it's the Tories. We have delivered what the public asked for. You asked for Brexit, we've delivered it. And then the country will go, yeah, but what about the money from the EU that pays for roads, pays for infrastructure, pays for community projects, pays for this, pays for that. They'll go, right,
Chris,
what we have to do then is next year we will set this in place. There is no plan.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no plan. And what Ivan McKee has been pointing out, and he's not just been carping from the sidelines, he's been saying this since, way back in last year. And he has, come to the conclusion, very much with the PPE as well, that he's had to do things himself.
Indeed.
And the Scottish Government are now slowly finding out that if they want to do something, they have to do it themselves.
Well, what I was going to say to Chris here in response to what you have just said, and reading Mr. McKee's letter, it seems very obvious that the Scottish Government feels that there isn't enough money in the kitty at the moment to protect these jobs and to bring Scotland out of the COVID-19 era, if you like, unscathed.
No, Gordon, and this is the nub of the matter. is the fact that there is no more money in Westminster because they have splaffed it up on stupid vanity projects, painting a tail wing, with an upside down Union Jack, which is supposed to, signify distress. Well, there you go. The whole country is in distress.
Yeah.
But more importantly than that is the fact that what will happen when the general public in Scotland turn round and ask the Scottish Government, what about these projects? The Scottish Tories are going to be, it's no our fault and all the rest of it. You didn't mitigate this, you didn't mitigate that, and so they will not take any responsibility for it.
Can I bring you, Effie, back into this discussion? One of the things that I remember, from last week's programmes, was the amount of money that the Scottish Government actually said they needed to try to mitigate the effects of the COVID-19 epidemic were actually only about £6 billion, which is a tiny, tiny fraction of what it cost for high-speed 2 rail link. And I don't know about you, but I'm certain that the magic money tree which the Tories managed to shake when they need it, the Bank of England, is surely full of enough money to give the Scots what they need.
Yeah, of course it is. As Chris just mentioned, there's enough money about to advertise Brexit, to pay for the non-existent tracing app, the Cummings, the different Cummings branches, and all his family funding these things, to pay for ferry companies without ships and ferries, to pay for all sorts of things. So there is enough money for all of that, for all these crazy vanity projects. And I was a Londoner at the time when Boris Johnson was spending £40 million on the Garden Bridge, which never actually happened. And also when the whole Arcuri thing was happening. So there is the actual thing about money and sovereign states. It's a very complex argument, and obviously, we're not going to cover it in 2 minutes. But sovereign states are able to borrow in a state of the magnitude of the United Kingdom as it stands at the moment, as we understand it, is a huge structure. So it is able to borrow. It is also able to print money and regulate inflation within its own fiscal capacity.
So are you saying, sorry to interrupt you, Effie, are you saying here that Boris Johnson and the Chancellor are making a political decision not to make this money available rather than a financial one?
100%. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I was going to say to Effie, don't forget about the...
okay, I'm going to go to our next story. Chris,
wasted on water cannons.
Chris, yes. I'm going to have to stop you there. Yes. We're moving on to our next story, which is going all the way over to Russia now. And the Kremlin has called a vote which allows Putin to rule until 2036 a triumph. The Kremlin said that Russians had shown how much they trusted Vladimir Putin with a nationwide vote that gave him the right to run for 2 more terms, while people wondered whether he really would stay on for another 16 years. Announcing the final results of the week-long vote, officials said that nearly 78% of voters had backed changes to the constitution, which allowed Putin, whose 4th term as president ends in 2024, to run for 2 more back-to-back 6-year terms. This means the 67-year-old former KGB officer who's ruled Russia for over 2 decades as either president or prime minister could be in power until he is 83. An independent monitoring group said the vote was deeply flawed. But Dmitry Peskov, Putin's spokesman, said the emphatic nature of the result was a measure of how deeply Russians trusted Putin to run the country. It's definitely considered a triumph. What took place was, in effect, a de facto triumphant referendum on trust in Putin, said Peskov. Putin thanked voters for their support and their trust. We need stability and time to strengthen the country, he said. Golos, a non-governmental organisation which monitors elections, said that it had recorded numerous irregularities during the vote, including ballot stuffing and widespread cases of employers forcing staff to cast a ballot. Already the longest-serving leader in modern Russian history since Joseph Stalin, Putin has said he is yet to decide on his own political future, but wanted officials to avoid getting distracted by the question of who might one day succeed him. Now, this is a remarkable story because here is a man who doesn't obviously want to get arrested for corruption, and by managing to stay in office a bit longer, is hopefully going to avoid that. Surely the people of Russia, Effie, can't really have voted 78% of them to have Mr. Putin for the next 16 years. What do you think, Effie?
That would be I think that's fantastic. I mean, it's such an interesting take on your future intentions, isn't it? So you have pre-voted someone in for the next 16 years. It's beyond grotesque. This isn't, sadly, I, as an observer of Eastern European history myself, it's not. This isn't shocking at all. Since authoritarianism, this is basically the rule book of authoritarianism. Putin is also known for his neoconservative, neo-fascist ideology. He's supporting Trump. He supports other hostile action in other parts of the world. He has funded Brexit. He is very close to Boris Johnson. A story emerged today about how close he is also to the other man, Genrik, who's got other interests within Russia. And we know about Cummings' CV, which is absolutely enriched by his time in Moscow between 1997 and 2000. So Putin is behind at the moment. At the moment, this is quite a dangerous development. Vladimir Putin is behind world order as we know it today. If Biden manages to come in, and I'm not the one who's going to come to you and say, right, Biden is my ideal candidate. He is not, but I would vote for Biden in order to get away from this corrupt structure that's happening at the moment. Also, Putin is very, very influential within Europe, spending a lot of money to support his ideology, which is the breaking up of Europe and the weakening of Europe. We know of hostile action in the Ukraine. We know of all of this stuff. The Russian people absolutely hate him. In fact, I could tell you now that 79% of them would probably vote against him. Poverty in Russia is unspeakable. Capitalism has absolutely lost the plot within Russia. The secrecy of the Russian state is something that is historically present. But for example, just look at coronavirus. Do we know what's been happening in Russia in relation to coronavirus? No, we don't.
We don't.
Political assassinations have been happening now for the last 20 years. I owned a business in London when Litvinenko was murdered, and I still remember the presence of the police within Itsu restaurant on Piccadilly when the night that Litvinenko was murdered. Now, this didn't happen yesterday. This was years and years ago. It's a dangerous development. I had no doubt that he was going to do it, but let's wait and see what happens in America and in Europe. This really needs to be stopped from the outside.
Okay, well, listen, thank you, Effie. If I could come to you now, Chris, and I mean, this looks very much like Boris Johnson. It looks a bit like what Boris Johnson was doing, using the coronavirus as a cover to achieve some other goal. It looks like Mr. Putin is using the excuse of the coronavirus to strengthen his own position.
I mean, honestly, how can I top that from Effie? That was absolutely wonderful. Do you know what I mean?
It was very thorough, wasn't it?
So knowledgeable in that.
Indeed.
I mean, I can only reference a great article in The Guardian today by Nick Cohen, where he actually said Putin is up to no good. This John needs help.
That's the understatement of the century.
I mean, that tells you all you need to know. About. I mean, what's happening. The other things that Effie didn't mention about Russia, probably because she didn't have the time.
Yeah. Well,
but the fact that in this single vote, the Russians have, although they've chosen to take a package of amendments that, covers the pensions, covers the minimum wage boost and all the rest of it. We're not talking about the fact that there is radical reform on the whole question of faith, which will inherently happen. It will inherently hit the LGBT community within Russia.
Right. Okay.
Because Russia have been hitting them over the head with a big stick for years and years and years. And what we're going to see is yet another denial of democracy, similarly as to what we can see is happening in Hong Kong.
Well, listen, Chris, I'm going to just interrupt our normal story. This is just breaking today. Ghislaine Maxwell, the former girlfriend and longtime associate of the late disgraced Jeffrey Epstein, was arrested in New Hampshire on Thursday on U.S. charges of luring underage girls so that Epstein could sexually abuse them. The arrest of the British socialite adds another twist to the mystery of Epstein, whose high-flying lifestyle included private Caribbean islands and powerful connections that his victims say allowed him to abuse minors with impunity. Maxwell was arrested in Bradford, New Hampshire, according to the FBI. She is charged with 4 counts related to procuring and transporting minors for illegal sex acts and 2 counts of perjury, according to the indictment by federal prosecutors in New York. A very quick comment, if you can, for me, Effie, on this news that's just breaking today.
Of course. Are the FBI coming to question Prince Andrew, because I believe he was very close friends with her? I wonder. I'm not shocked. I'm appalled and disgusted and nauseated beyond belief, Gordon.
Yeah.
Whenever it comes to sexual abuse of minors, I'm a woman myself. I have a young child. I can't even conceptualize what this entails. She deserves to be arrested. The lot of them deserve to be arrested. She deserves to be questioned. She deserves to be in prison for the rest of her life if this is what she's been up to.
Yeah,
and I believe also, as I said, Prince Andrew has something to add to that.
So the FBI must have some powerful evidence to arrest her. Chris, your response to this news?
Well, it opens up a whole can of worms, and it asks even more certain questions about HRH Prince Andrew.
Yeah.
And his connection with the whole sordid affair, but more importantly, his hesitancy into not engaging with the US court officials as to answering the supposed subpoena that is currently live on him.
Yeah. Do you think, Chris, that she might do a deal, that she might go state's evidence on this and implicate others?
It's hard to tell. I really would like her to, because it could actually disgrace the royal family into doing something about their actions. But
some consequences.
There's a lot at stake here.
Actions.
But what is worrying is the fact that the more that people dig into this story, the more you find that the web is far, far reaching.
Yeah, it's like an octopus, isn't it? I have I've got 2 more stories tonight. We interrupted for. I think we'll do the big one, which is actually also broken today, about controlled drugs, cash, and firearms being seized today. Serious and organised crime task forces welcomed the successful cross-border operation where Police Scotland arrested 59 people and seized more than £25 million worth of controlled drugs. More than £7 million in cash and firearms, ammunition, explosives and industrial pill presses were also seized, while 6 stolen cars and a motorcycle have also been recovered. More than 50 warrants were executed by hundreds of officers at addresses throughout the country as part of a nationwide intelligence-led operation coordinated by the National Crime Agency and involving the Border Force and police forces throughout the UK. The Justice Secretary Humza Yousaf, the chair of Scotland's Serious Organised Crime Task Force, commended the work of Police Scotland and their partners, saying that this has been one of Police Scotland's most significant operations, combining the knowledge and resources of local policing with the with the service's enhanced national capabilities. It also underlines the importance of continued cross-border cooperation and law enforcement, as well as the value of partnerships forged throughout Scotland's Serious Organised Crime Task Force and our highly prized Scottish Crime Campus. The Lord Advocate, James Wolfe QC, said today, this operation highlights the value of partnership working between agencies which take part in the Serious Organised Crime Task Force. These agencies will continue to use all the means at their disposal to target organised crime groups. The operation also demonstrates the substantial benefits which we derive from international cooperation between law enforcement agencies in Scotland and those of other countries, benefits which help to ensure the safety and security of people living in Scotland. So we're going to move to our final story this evening, which is that there has been an update to the shielding guidance issued by the Scottish Government. New evidence indicates that a large percentage of children and young people may no longer need to shield. A review by the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health with regard to COVID-19 states that the majority of children with conditions, including asthma, diabetes, epilepsy and kidney disease, do not need to continue to shield and can, for example, return to school as it reopens. The latest advice is supported by clinical advisory groups and all 4 United Kingdom administrations. However, no child or young person will be removed from the shielding list until a discussion has been held with their clinical team. These discussions will take place throughout July, ensuring that children have appropriate advice for their condition ahead of school returning in August. Those who no longer need to shield should follow the advice for the wider population on social distancing with advice from their clinicians. And we know, I mean, the updating of this seems to go on constantly, but just before we leave this subject, we spoke briefly about children earlier on, Effie, coming out of lockdown, but I have to say I was surprised that the shielding guidance was changing too.
Well, it seems that new evidence is coming to light. Literally every single day, I follow closely. I try to the World Health Organization, and a lot of stuff has been coming through from them. Remarkably, also, let us not forget the president of the World Health Organization. His indication that please don't relax because this isn't over at all. And it seems to be spiking again in different parts of the world. But in regards to children, it seems to be actually good news, Gordon. So, the data, we know that throughout this, the data has been good on children. And it seems that, again, something has come to light. It appears that all 4 administrations seem to agree on that. It is very much the case. But obviously, for whoever's watching, as the guidance suggested, it's very, very important to be in touch with their individual clinicians before they do anything drastic and expose themselves to anything.
Thank you very much, Effie, for that. Just before we close out the show this evening, I just wanted to mention that Broadcasting Scotland has appeared in the national newspaper. In fact, I have a little copy. Kenny McBride has written a wonderful article in the National. So if you get a chance to go online, we will be able to put a link up, I hope, for this. Give us a moment or two. Anyway, Chris, I think you know rather more about this than myself and Effie. What can you tell us about the article that
I was absolutely overwhelmed. I was astounded the fact that that Kenny had written this wonderful piece, not just about Broadcasting Scotland, but about the need for independent media in Scotland.
Indeed,
the fact that that it's high time that Broadcasting Scotland were given their place, and I don't know how to do it on social media. I have tried everything to get all the indie activists engaged, not just in Broadcasting Scotland, but Independence Live as well.
Yes.
And and get them turned on to the fact that Scotland has got its own media. And I remember attending a rally, I think it was back in 2016, and the whole ethos of that rally was become the media.
Indeed.
We are the media.
Yep.
Because we know that the media is not working for us. And I think this is absolutely brilliant. It's put Broadcasting Scotland on the front page. It's put them front and centre in Scotland for the first time. And I just seriously hope that it brings in enough revenue so that Broadcasting Scotland can start taking on people, offering apprenticeships and giving them some jobs.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Listen, I also want to convey our thanks to the National for publishing the article, and also to the Scottish Independence Foundation as well for supporting us. Anyway, that's about it for this evening's show. As usual, at this time, I'll ask people to help us by making donations to the programme. So if you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland on a regular basis and become a supporter, you can do so by following the instructions on your screen now. Go to www.broadcastingscotland.scot/register and become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland. That's it from me here in Cowcaddens. I'd just like to thank my guests, Chris and Effie, and I shall be back again on Monday. Thanks again for watching, and from all of us here at Cowcaddens, very good evening to you. Yeah, well